The morning sun cast a golden glow over Arlington National Cemetery, its rays filtering through the ancient oaks and bathing the rows of white headstones in a serene light. Among the solemn pathways, where history whispered through the grass, stood Sergeant Marcus Ellison, a black tomb guard, his posture rigid and his gaze fixed on the tomb of the unknown soldier. His uniform was pristine, the creases sharp enough to cut glass, his boots polished to a mirror shine. On his chest, pinned with quiet pride, was the Medal of Honor, its blue ribbon and star-shaped medallion catching the light. It was a symbol of valor, earned through unimaginable sacrifice in a conflict that had tested his soul years ago. Marcus had carried the weight of that honor every day since, but never had it felt heavier than it did on this crisp autumn morning. The cemetery was unusually busy that day. A high-profile event had drawn a crowd of dignitaries, veterans, and onlookers, all gathered to commemorate a milestone in military history. Marcus stood sentinel, his movements precise and ceremonial, each step a tribute to the fallen. His role as a tomb guard was sacred, a duty that demanded perfection and reverence. The crowd watched in silence, captivated by the disciplined grace of the guards, their rifles gleaming as they executed their march with mechanical precision. Marcus felt the weight of their eyes, but his focus remained unwavering, his mind locked on the rhythm of his steps and the legacy he represented. Among the spectators was Judge Harold Whitaker, a man whose presence commanded attention in a different way. Whitaker, in his late 50s, carried himself with the air of someone who believed the world bent to his will. His tailored suit and polished loafers stood out against the muted tones of the cemetery, and his expression was one of detached superiority. He had been invited as a guest speaker, his reputation as a prominent figure in local legal circles securing him a place of honor at the event. Whitaker was known for his rigid adherence to protocol, his courtroom a place where rules were ironclad and deviations were not tolerated. But beneath his polished exterior lay a temperament that thrived on control, a trait that had earned him both respect and resentment in equal measure. As the ceremony progressed, Marcus performed his duties flawlessly, his every motion a testament to the discipline instilled in him through years of training. The Medal of Honor on his chest, though, seemed to draw Whitaker's attention like a magnet. The judge's eyes narrowed as he watched Marcus march, his lips tightening into a thin line. To Whitaker, the medal was an anomaly, a disruption of the uniformity he expected from the guards. He leaned toward an aide, whispering something that caused the younger man to shift uncomfortably. The aide hesitated, then nodded, scribbling a note. The crowd remained oblivious, their focus on the solemnity of the moment, but a subtle tension began to ripple through the air, unnoticed by all but a few. The ceremony concluded, and the crowd began to disperse, their murmurs of respect and admiration filling the space. Marcus remained at his post, his duty extending beyond the event. As the dignitaries mingled, Whitaker approached the perimeter of the tomb, his stride purposeful. He stopped a few feet from Marcus, his presence imposing, though Marcus's eyes remained fixed forward, unyielding to the judge's scrutiny. Whitaker cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. He spoke with authority, his tone laced with a condescension that made the air feel colder. He demanded that Marcus remove the Medal of Honor from his uniform, claiming it violated the strict dress code of the tomb guard, which prized uniformity above all else. The words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate, a command that seemed to echo across the hallowed ground. Marcus did not flinch, His training had prepared him for many things: hostile environments, physical exhaustion, even the weight of grief, but not this. The Medal of Honor was not just a decoration. It was a piece of his soul, a reminder of the lives he had saved and the ones he could not. To remove it would be to strip away a part of his identity, a betrayal of the sacrifices it represented. Yet, as a soldier, he was bound by discipline, by the chain of command, even when it came from a civilian like Whitaker. The crowd, now thinning, began to notice the confrontation. Whispers spread, heads turned, and a few phones emerged, their cameras capturing the moment in silent judgment. Whitaker's demand was not a request, but an order, delivered with the certainty of a man accustomed to being obeyed. He stood taller, his chest puffed out, as if daring Marcus to defy him. The judge's reasoning was rooted in his obsession with rules, but there was something else beneath it, a flicker of discomfort, perhaps, at the sight of a black man wearing the nation's highest honor in such a visible role. Marcus, still motionless, felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His heart pounded, but his face remained a mask of stoicism, betraying nothing. The silence stretched, taut and electric, as the two men stood locked in an invisible battle of wills. A senior officer, Colonel James Hargrove, stepped forward, his presence a calming force amid the growing tension. Hargrove, a grizzled veteran with decades of service, had overseen Marcus's training and knew the young sergeant's character. He approached Whitaker with measured steps, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. Hargrove explained, in a tone that brooked no argument, that the Medal of Honor was not merely an accessory but a symbol of extraordinary bravery, one that superseded any dress code. Whitaker's face reddened, his jaw tightening, but he did not back down. Instead, he doubled down, insisting that rules were rules, and no exceptions could be made, not even for a medal. The exchange was brief but heated, drawing more attention from the lingering crowd. The confrontation ended as abruptly as it had begun. Whitaker, sensing the growing scrutiny, turned on his heel and walked away, his aide trailing behind. Marcus remained at his post, his posture unbroken, but the weight of the encounter lingered. The crowd dispersed, but the moment had been captured, not just on phones, but in the minds of those who witnessed it. By evening, clips of the incident had begun to circulate online, shared across platforms with captions that ranged from outrage to disbelief. The hashtag #TombGuard incident trended on X, amplifying the story to a national audience. Comments poured in, some defending Marcus's right to wear the medal, others questioning Whitaker's authority to make such a demand. The internet, ever hungry for drama, latched onto the story with fervor. Marcus returned to his quarters that night, the weight of the day settling into his bones. He sat on the edge of his bed, the Medal of Honor in his hands, its cool metal grounding him. He traced the star with his thumb, remembering the mission that had earned it, the chaos, the screams, the split-second decisions that had saved lives. The judge's words echoed in his mind, not because they held truth, but because they revealed a prejudice that Marcus had faced before, though never so publicly. He knew the incident would not fade quietly. The world was watching now, and the ripples of that morning were already spreading far beyond the cemetery. In the days that followed, the story gained traction. News outlets picked it up, framing it as a clash between honor and authority. Veterans groups issued statements condemning Whitaker's actions, while civil rights organizations pointed to the racial undertones of the confrontation. Marcus, though, remained silent, his duty as a tomb guard keeping him above the fray. He continued his watch, his steps as precise as ever, but the world around him was shifting. Protests formed outside Whitaker's courthouse, small at first but growing in number. The judge, meanwhile, retreated into his chambers, unaware that the storm he had ignited was only beginning to gather strength. Whitaker's career, built on years of meticulous rulings and a reputation for fairness, began to show cracks. Colleagues distanced themselves, wary of the public backlash. The judge, however, remained defiant, issuing a statement through his office that defended his actions as a matter of protocol, not prejudice. The statement only fueled the fire as critics dissected his words, pointing to a history of rulings that suggested a pattern of bias. Marcus, still bound by his oath and his duty, watched from afar as the world debated his honor. He knew the truth of his actions, but the court of public opinion was a different battlefield, one he had no training to navigate. As the days turned into weeks, the incident refused to fade. The cemetery, once a place of quiet reverence, became a focal point for activists and media. Marcus's name became a rallying cry, his image, a black soldier standing tall with the Medal of Honor, plastered across screens and protest signs. Whitaker, meanwhile, found himself increasingly isolated, his once sterling reputation now a liability. The clash at the tomb had sparked something larger, a reckoning that neither man could have foreseen. And as the nation watched, the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of power and pride. The autumn chill deepened over Arlington, the leaves turning brittle and gold as the days passed since the confrontation at the tomb of the unknown soldier. Sergeant Marcus Ellison continued his duties with the same unyielding precision, his boots striking the ground in perfect rhythm, his rifle a steady extension of his will. The Medal of Honor remained pinned to his chest, its presence a quiet defiance, though Marcus carried it not as a statement but as a truth. The cemetery, however, was no longer the sanctuary it once was. News vans lined the edges of the grounds, their cameras trained on the tomb, waiting for a glimpse of the man at the center of a growing firestorm. The world beyond the headstones buzzed with outrage, and Marcus, though trained to remain stoic, felt the weight of it pressing against his resolve. The incident with Judge Harold Whitaker had metastasized into a national spectacle. Social media platforms, particularly X, became battlegrounds where hashtags like #Justice for Marcus and #Whitaker must go trended relentlessly. Posts dissected every angle of the confrontation, from the judge's tone to Marcus's unflinching posture. Amateur sleuths unearthed old court records, painting a picture of Whitaker as a man whose rulings often leaned heavily on those who didn't fit his narrow definition of order. The narrative took on a life of its own, with viral videos on YouTube and TikTok reenacting the moment, some adding dramatic music to amplify the tension. The story was no longer just about a medal. It had become a symbol of deeper divides, a lightning rod for debates about race, respect, and authority. Marcus, bound by the code of the tomb guard, remained silent. His days were consumed by the ritual of the watch, 20. 1 steps, a pause, a turn, and 20. 1 steps back. Each movement was a meditation, a way to center himself amid the chaos. But the chaos was inescapable. Letters and emails flooded the offices of the old guard, some offering support, others hurling vitriol. Veterans organizations rallied behind Marcus, their statements calling for accountability and respect for his service. Civil rights groups organized marches, their signs bearing Marcus's name alongside demands for systemic change. The cemetery, meant to be a place of eternal rest, had become a stage for a nation grappling with its values. Judge Whitaker, meanwhile, found himself besieged. His courthouse in downtown Arlington, a stately building of gray stone, was now a focal point for protesters. They gathered daily, their numbers swelling as the story spread. Placards denounced Whitaker's actions, some accusing him of racism, others of abusing his authority. The judge, accustomed to commanding respect, was unprepared for the ferocity of the backlash. His office issued another statement, this one more defensive, claiming the incident had been misconstrued and that his demand was rooted in a commitment to tradition, not prejudice. The words fell flat, dismissed as tone deaf by a public already convinced of his guilt. Colleagues began to avoid him, their conversations hushed when he entered the room. Whitaker's once imposing presence seemed to shrink under the weight of scrutiny. Behind closed doors, Whitaker grappled with the unraveling of his carefully curated life. He had built his career on precision, on the belief that rules were the foundation of order. To him, Marcus's medal was a deviation, a challenge to the uniformity he revered. But the public saw it differently, and their judgment was merciless. Old cases from Whitaker's past resurfaced. Decisions that had once seemed unremarkable now cast in a new light. A pattern emerged. Sentences that disproportionately affected minorities, rulings that favored strict interpretations over compassion. The media pounced, with op-eds and talk shows dissecting his record. Whitaker, who had once prided himself on his impartiality, found himself painted as a villain in a story he could no longer control. Marcus, though shielded from the worst of the public storm by his duty, was not untouched by it. His family, living in a modest suburb outside D.C., faced their own challenges. Reporters camped outside their home, their cameras intrusive and unrelenting. Marcus's mother, a schoolteacher with a quiet strength, fielded calls from supporters and detractors alike, her voice steady but her heart heavy. His younger brother, a college student, took to X to defend Marcus, his posts raw and emotional, amplifying the family's pride in his service. The Ellisons were a close-knit unit, their bond forged through years of overcoming adversity, but the intensity of the spotlight tested their resilience. Marcus, when he visited home on rare leave, saw the strain in their eyes, though they never spoke of it directly. The military, too, was drawn into the fray. Colonel James Hargrove, who had intervened during the initial confrontation, became a reluctant spokesperson for the old guard. He navigated press conferences with the skill of a seasoned officer, emphasizing Marcus's exemplary record and the sanctity of the Medal of Honor. Hargrove's words were measured, but his frustration was palpable. The tomb guard was meant to be above politics, a symbol of unity, yet it had been dragged into a polarized maelstrom. Behind the scenes, Hargrove worked to shield Marcus from the pressure, ensuring his duties remained his focus. But even Hargrove could not stop the tide of public opinion, which demanded accountability from Whitaker and justice for Marcus. As the weeks passed, the protests outside the courthouse grew more organized. Community leaders joined the cause, their speeches drawing crowds that spilled into the streets. A petition calling for Whitaker's resignation garnered hundreds of thousands of signatures, its momentum unstoppable. The judge, once a fixture in Arlington's legal community, found himself increasingly isolated. Invitations to speak at events dried up, and his name was quietly removed from the guest lists of galas and fundraisers. His colleagues, wary of being tainted by association, began to whisper about early retirement. Whitaker, however, clung to his position, convinced that the storm would pass, that his reputation would endure. The media frenzy showed no signs of abating. A major news network aired a documentary-style segment on the incident, featuring interviews with veterans, historians, and activists. They traced the history of the Medal of Honor, its rarity, and its significance, framing Marcus as a hero wronged by an out-of-touch judge. The segment included grainy footage of the confrontation, slowed down to emphasize Whitaker's stern expression and Marcus's unyielding resolve. The public's response was visceral, with ex-posts calling for boycotts of the courthouse and demands for an official apology. The hashtag Medal of Honor Matters trended alongside images of Marcus in his dress uniform, the medal gleaming against the dark fabric. Marcus, though, remained focused on his duty. Each night, as he stood watch under the stars, the cemetery's silence offered a fleeting reprieve from the noise of the world. He thought of the soldiers beneath the ground, their sacrifices eternal, and found strength in their memory. The medal on his chest was not just his own. It belonged to them, to the ideals they had died for. Yet, as he marched, he could not ignore the growing sense that the incident had set something larger in motion, something that would not be resolved by silence or stoicism. Whitaker, meanwhile, began to feel the walls closing in. A judicial review board announced an investigation into his conduct, prompted by the public outcry and pressure from advocacy groups. The board's announcement was formal, its language dry, but its implications were clear. Whitaker's career hung in the balance. He spent long hours in his office, poring over legal texts, searching for a defense that would restore his standing. But the evidence was mounting. Testimonies from former colleagues, records of past rulings, and the unrelenting voice of the public. The judge, once untouchable, was now vulnerable, his fate tied to the very rules he had so rigidly enforced. As the investigation loomed, the nation's attention remained fixed on Arlington. The cemetery, with its endless rows of headstones, had become a battleground for a different kind of war, one fought with words, images, and hashtags. Marcus, standing sentinel, was both its hero and its symbol, a man whose quiet strength had ignited a reckoning. The storm was far from over, and as the days grew shorter and the air colder, the stage was set for a resolution that would shake the foundations of power and leave an indelible mark on all who bore witness. Winter's edge crept into Arlington, the air sharp with frost as the headstones of cemetery stood like silent sentinels under a gray sky. Sergeant Marcus Ellison maintained his vigil at the tomb of the unknown soldier, his breath visible in the cold as he executed each step with unwavering precision. The Medal of Honor on his chest gleamed faintly, a beacon of resilience amid the storm that had enveloped his life. The world beyond the cemetery had grown louder, its voices amplified by weeks of unrelenting scrutiny, but Marcus remained a pillar of quiet strength, his duty anchoring him against the chaos. The incident with Judge Harold Whitaker had spiraled into a national reckoning, and as the days ticked toward a resolution, the weight of history pressed heavily on both men. The courthouse where Whitaker presided had become a fortress under siege. Protesters gathered daily, their numbers undeterred by the biting wind, their signs now a permanent fixture along the building's perimeter. The chants of justice for Marcus and Whitaker must go echoed through the streets, their rhythm as relentless as the tomb guard's march. The Judicial Review Board's investigation into Whitaker's conduct had gained momentum. Its scope expanding beyond the cemetery incident to encompass his entire career. Old rulings, once buried in legal archives, were unearthed and dissected, each one adding fuel to the narrative of a judge whose rigidity masked deeper biases. The media, sensing blood, descended with ferocity, their cameras capturing every moment of the unfolding drama. Marcus, though shielded by his duty, felt the ripples of the outside world. His family bore the brunt of the attention, their small home now a waypoint for reporters and supporters alike. His mother, ever steadfast, hung a flag in the window, its stars and stripes a quiet declaration of pride. His brother, emboldened by the movement, organized rallies at his college, channeling his anger into action. Marcus, on his rare visits home, saw the toll it took. The sleepless nights, the whispered worries. But he also saw their resolve, a mirror of his own. He carried their strength with him as he returned to the tomb, each step a reminder that he was not alone, even as the spotlight burned brighter. The investigation into Whitaker reached a turning point when a series of testimonies painted a damning picture. Former clerks and colleagues, once loyal, spoke of a man whose obsession with control bordered on cruelty. They recounted instances of dismissive rulings, of defendants judged not by evidence but by Whitaker's unspoken prejudices. A particularly searing account came from a retired bailiff, who described a case where Whitaker had sentenced a young black man harshly for a minor offense. His reasoning laced with assumptions that left the courtroom stunned. These stories, once confined to whispers, now flooded X and news outlets, each one chipping away at Whitaker's carefully constructed facade. The judge, once a towering figure in Arlington's legal circles, found himself increasingly isolated. His office, once bustling with aides and visitors, was now a place of silence, the phones ringing less frequently as allies distanced themselves. Whitaker spent long hours staring out his window, the protests below a constant reminder of his fall. He drafted statements, each one more desperate than the last, but his words found no purchase in a public that had already judged him. His insistence on protocol, once his shield, now seemed hollow, a flimsy defense against the tide of evidence. The Judicial Review Board's hearings, though closed to the public, leaked through anonymous sources, each revelation tightening the noose around Whitaker's career. Marcus, meanwhile, became an unwilling icon. His image, all resolute, the Medal of Honor gleaming, was plastered across protest signs and viral posts, a symbol of dignity in the face of injustice. Veterans groups honored him with awards, their ceremonies quiet but heartfelt, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Civil rights organizations invited him to speak, though he declined, his silence a testament to his commitment to the tomb's code. Colonel James Hargrove, ever watchful, ensured Marcus's duties remained his sanctuary, but even he could not shield him entirely. The old guard faced pressure to issue a statement, to take a stand, but Hargrove navigated the politics with care, keeping Marcus's focus on the mission. As the investigation neared its conclusion, the nation's attention remained riveted. A major news network aired a follow-up special, this one featuring a panel of legal experts who debated Whitaker's fate. The consensus was grim, the judge's career was untenable, his actions at the cemetery a spark that had ignited a long, overdue reckoning. X posts exploded with predictions, some calling for his resignation, others for his removal. The #TombGuard triumph emerged, a counterpoint to the earlier outrage, celebrating Marcus's resilience. The narrative had shifted. Marcus was no longer just a victim, but a hero whose quiet strength had exposed a deeper truth. The Judicial Review Board's final hearing was a formality, its outcome all but certain. Whitaker, dressed in a suit that no longer seemed to fit his diminished frame, sat stone, faced as the board delivered its findings. The report was scathing, detailing a pattern of conduct that undermined the principles of justice. The cemetery incident, though the catalyst, was merely one piece of a larger mosaic. The board recommended Whitaker's removal from the bench, a decision that sent shockwaves through Arlington's legal community. Within hours, the news broke, and the protests outside the courthouse turned into celebrations, the crowd's cheers echoing into the night. Whitaker's resignation came quietly, a single-page letter delivered to the board the following day. He cited personal reasons, but the subtext was clear. His career was over, his legacy tarnished beyond repair. He retreated to his home, the curtains drawn, as the world moved on without him. The courthouse, once his domain, began the process of replacing him, the air lighter in his absence. Colleagues spoke of reform, of lessons learned, though their words carried the weight of self-preservation. Whitaker's fall was a cautionary tale, a reminder that power, unchecked, could crumble under the weight of its own arrogance. Marcus continued his watch, the cemetery returning to its solemn rhythm. The news vans had moved on, their focus shifting to the next story, but the impact of the incident lingered. The old guard issued a quiet statement, reaffirming the sanctity of the tomb and the honor of its guards. Marcus, though never one for the spotlight, felt a shift within himself. The Medal of Honor, once a private burden, now carried a public weight, a symbol of a battle won not with words but with resolve. He stood taller, his steps surer, as he marched under the winter sky. The nation, too, felt the ripples of the resolution. The story of Marcus and Whitaker became a touchstone, a narrative woven into discussions of justice and respect. Schools taught it in civics classes, and veterans groups used it to inspire new generations. On X, the hashtags faded, but the memory of the incident endured, a testament to the power of one moment to change the course of history. Marcus's family, finally free of the media's gaze, gathered to celebrate quietly, their pride in him unspoken but profound. As spring approached, the cemetery bloomed with new life, the cherry blossoms framing the tomb in delicate pink. Marcus, still a sentinel, carried the lessons of the past months in his heart. The world had tested him, and he had stood firm, his honor intact. Whitaker, a shadow of his former self, faded into obscurity, his name a footnote in a story that belonged to Marcus. The tomb of the unknown soldier stood as it always had, a monument to sacrifice, and Marcus, with the Medal of Honor on his chest, remained its steadfast guardian, his legacy etched into the nation's conscience.
If you liked this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with others so they can learn something from it too.